Hello, everyone. Thank you, Preet, for the lovely introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining our panel on design systems. Today, as Preet mentioned, we have Amanda, Tobia, and Bronwen. I'm Sera Tajima, and I'm a product designer at Webflow. And to get started, I'd like to ask everyone to briefly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about your experience working on design systems.
Definitely, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Amanda Gulley. I oversee the user experience team at EdPlus, which is an enterprise unit at Arizona State University who focuses on a lot of the technology innovation. We also care deeply about access to education for all. We count who we include, not who we exclude. And because of that, we've built up a large amount of partnerships with large brands like Starbucks and Uber and YouTube, which makes design systems and designing digital experiences challenging. We also act as a product team. We are consultants and we are an agency. So when talking about design systems, we have to be very thoughtful about how do we scale products that might look a little different based on the different brands we work with, but all have the same goal and ROI and KPIs towards enrolling students or retaining students or engaging students at different levels.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll maybe jump in next, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm Bronwen. I'm a senior product designer at Xero. I have to say who Xero is. I know that they're known in America and Canada, but someone mentioned to me that they liked Xero shoes, so I thought I should probably correct that one, which is, so Xero is an accounting software for small business owners, originally created in New Zealand and has expanded globally now. And I work for their design systems team. I joined the team about 7 months ago. But the design system team is very much a centralized model. There's sort of 20 of us supporting about 150 designers. So it's a pretty epic design system. Previous to that, I was at an agency where we built a design system for one of the local universities, RMIT University here in Australia. So that's me.
Awesome.
I guess it's my turn. Hello everyone, my name is Tobia. I work at Yelp. I'm a senior product designer at Yelp, and I work with the design system. I've been joining the design system, I think, a year ago, but I've been with Yelp for almost 5 years, and I saw the whole evolution of the design team. So we started like from 10 people, right now we're almost 50. So I saw the whole evolution, people coming and go, but that was a great experience. And decided to work on the design systems. I had a passion since I started, design by systematizing whatever I could to make it easier, the job easier for designers. And being on the design system right now, currently I'm mostly focused on documentation, creating components, organization, and also experience. That's how we call it. Mainly focus on discoverability of components and make life easier for designers to go and find what they need, and also like any kind of support.
Great. So I think there can be a lot of confusion over what a design system actually is, UI kits, component libraries. So can we explain what a design system is for those of us that don't know? And feel free to jump in.
Yeah. Sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I think a design system is relatively the same across a lot of units. Now, there are a lot of nuances where I think teams are building out very specific use cases with their design systems. And for example, we really prioritize having a data layer in our design system that we can scale out engagement data, which is not a norm. When you talk about UI kits and the components that are built within a design system or component library, usually that's the components of whether it's design, whether it's the code. And so I think another aspect that we prioritize, at least at Arizona State University, is a lot around the data and how to also scale that within a design system, which I know is unique from others. And so I know I'll pass it on because I'm sure there's a lot of fundamentals that are throughout Yelp's and Xero's design systems.
Yeah, I
Tobia?
guess I guess I can go. I think for like how I see it, at least on the design system side, I used to think that of course design system was just a style guide, which is just a bunch of components and a sticker sheet. And then when I started actually working with design system, like all my perspective changed completely. And I was like, yeah, this is not only a set of components or a Figma file. At that time, it was a sketch file where
Yeah.
people go and just pick up the components, but it's the whole philosophy and how you think about your products and how you scale it to different, for accessibility right now, it's a big topic, like how you scale it to different platform, of course, or how you create different experience across your products. And Yelp is very diverse in that because we have a lot of different small teams inside our design team, and we have main products, which the business side and the consumer side, and then we have also the wait list product, which is the for restaurant, and those are kind of all of them have different needs, and it's also hard to create just design system that fits every single need. So a challenge
Yeah.
that I'm currently facing right now, because I'm in charge of this, of course, is kind of make it our design system accessible for feature team. So we don't want to we can't really look up all the components, all the places and everything. Like design system cannot really control that, so we kind of um, create a bridge with the feature team, which will be responsible for their components, but the main connection will be with the main design system, which is called our cookbook system, design system. So, and I realize how massive this whole thing is, and it's not, as I said before, just a bunch of components that you can, pick from, a specific file, and then set of principle is how you work with your, developers to make this accessible for engineers, because designer is easy, you just design it, it is there, designer going quickly. But engineering is a little different. Like there's a different rules that an engineer follows on building components, and then comes in being synced between design and components through the visual. For example, the token. There was a great talk today. So it's I realized that it's a beast. It's not just just a pet. That's what
Yeah.
I say.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Bron, how would you explain a design system to someone who's just getting started?
I think probably I'd start by describing what it's not. And I think Tobias started talking about that, which is, it's not a style guide, it's not brand guidelines, it's not static. I think a design system can be a lot of things for us within Xero. It's sort of a UI standard, it's a code standard. It's, like you say, it needs to be scalable, and we need to be thinking about how we're going to scale it. It needs to be a support model, and we need to be able to support the wider community of designers inside Xero, and together work out, UX best practices, culture. You touched on it earlier, accessibility across, both design and development and engineering is incredibly important. But we also have things like content in there, and we're setting UX guidelines around content and how to write beautiful, both useful, but also Xero-focused content, research models. So there's a whole load of things that can be included in it. I think the most important thing is to realize that it's evolving and constantly evolving, and it's not something that you create and then step away from and hope that it will kind of work.
Right. Yeah. On that note, what are some considerations that you've had to deal with when you've got started designing your system?
I can chime in this.
Oh, go on, Tobias.
Oh, sorry, Bron, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, all I was gonna say is with Xero, their design system, although internal, we don't have an external facing one or a public facing one at the moment, has been around for maybe sort of I think 4 years now, so long before I joined. So there was I don't know what they had to do when they established it, but there's been a lot of hard work to get it to a point where we're now, want to basically have 100% use of the design system. But I know when I started building, or I started with the university that I talked about, for me, the biggest thing was just getting buy-in and getting people on board. And I think that's the most important thing about a design system. It's about collaboration and bringing teams together. And so before really starting any process or creation of the design system. And again, I think Tobia touched on it earlier, which is principles. It's like we need to all get on the same page with what we're achieving. So actually starting out is getting engineers, content designers, research designers, service designers, all in the room to establish what you want from your design system to make sure it's going to be a success.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Tobia, did you add to that?
Yeah, I think we have I mean, at Yelp, at least from my experience, I kind of had the same experience of Bronwen. So I basically came in when the system was already there, like over a year, I guess, or a year and a half. We're still like super new, so it was kind of always evolving, of course. But I think like one of the challenge and the obstacle that they got at the beginning, so I just got a little bit of history of our system. It's just the fact that we were kind of modernizing our product, but building the design system at the same time. Because there was this necessity. Yelp, it was like this constant hearing on the back of our minds that Yelp was like it's old. They didn't change much in the last 10 years, or like design wise. It was always like small changes, and I think probably that's due to the culture a little bit. It was like data driven, of course, like mostly focused. But then over the 4 years that I've been at Yelp, I think this perspective will like shift quite a bit, to be honest, because I saw the beginning how it was, at least when I joined, and how it is right now. So we have kind of a focus as well on the design side. So that's why there was this necessity of creating like a real team around the design system. Before it was just like, yes, we have this style guide, someone managed this, but it's not a staple. It's not something that people can rely on. They can go in and just like make sure that we're building like a cohesive product and something that is actually well structured across the whole organization. So I had the same experience, and I came in the same situation. But I think that was one of the challenge, and also another level of complexity was the fact that we kind of needed to support everything, every single size, every single kind of a device. Like I think everybody has this challenge. So you kind of need to think about a lot first. So you always do an audit, and you think about like the main elements, and then you start kicking off. I think also for our side, there was a buy-in process, and kind of explain the benefit of having this in place and having a real team taking care of this. So I think this is probably a common thread among all when the design system gets created at the beginning.
Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, I think my story is a little bit different in the sense that we built the design system actually a few years ago. And so we came from a much smaller team we had one designer and one developer start from the ground up. And so at the beginning, there's always a lot of subjectivity when you're going back and you're looking at all the components that you're using. You're having to make a decision, which ones do you move forward with, which ones do you not? At that time, we only had brand standards, and the brand standards don't tell you which components perform better, which ones align more with the colors and the typography. But when you think about padding and spacing and the different hierarchies of your typeface, there's so much to consider that it's really important to document and understand the reasons why you choose a certain bootstrap grid that's different than this one, why you chose 8 pixels of padding. Because even these really small changes make a big difference after you begin creating components. And if you have to go back, your entire system shifts. And so I think a lot of the foundations that we went through, we had to be very sound in our decisions, and we had to do a lot of research and understand why, from a scalability standpoint, we were going down this direction. And so I think subjectivity was definitely something that you have to use your UX best practices to really understand. And so for us, we really spent time testing things that we liked versus things that performed better. And so going back to that data and how critical that was, and still is for us as we continue to grow and expand the design system, is definitely the cornerstone for us.
Yeah, awesome. I'm curious, when it comes to buy-in, what did that process look like for you all, and what kind of challenges did you have?
Maybe you can go first. Oh, go on, Amanda. No, you go.
Again, ours is a little unique. Probably an interesting story. We are a unit at Arizona State University, which is a very large higher ed institution. And so we started the design system on our team. And we had a lot of use cases that required us to move quickly, and we didn't have a lot of resources to do so. And so we had to be more efficient with our time. But the buy-in was now the rest of the university, who's also going through a huge change within their web standards. And so we essentially had to get buy-in for the entire university to adopt a version of our design system, which is challenging, because when you think about this small but mighty team creating standards for everybody, there wasn't the necessarily total buy-in from everyone at the beginning to feel attached to what we were delivering. And so I think, again, going back to the reasons why we did things the way they were, and being okay with change, because our use cases may not have been relevant to all use cases. And so for us, it was really important to help educate, provide data and research, and show why we did things the way we did, how they perform, how they can be applied across the broader spectrum of the ecosystem. It was challenging, and it's still challenging. We're working towards how do we align, because we've made decisions that are different from now the university's decisions. And so it's definitely, you know, an interesting place to be right now in terms of moving forward and making sure that we can keep that cohesiveness from the more mature design system to this newer one that's evolving from it.
Yeah, great. Tobia?
Yeah, I would say, like, for our case, we kind of make a case and try to break it down in like steps, to make, like, leadership understand like the benefits of every single step. Kind of, we broke it down, like, it was a long walk. Like, it was like the plan was like for 36 months, so it's like, it's a long like break of this single step. But I think we focus mainly like some criteria to just kind of explain the idea behind our design system, or like why we should have a team dedicated for that, because it's more resources, there's probably more money for the company, because you might have to hire new people, and it's a cost for the company, so you kind of want to focus on the benefits and what you're going to get in return. I think that's probably the best focus, I believe, in my opinion. And we had like some criteria, like efficiency, of course. So you have a specific team that is dedicated to that, with the PMs, with engineer, with designer, and they only work on that. So it's actually like working on a feature, right? You have a team that works on a feature. You're gonna have the same for components and style, for like not style, sorry, for design system and all those things.
Yeah.
But, then usually the system should be like enjoyable, like easy to use, and then of course you should be effective. Like you're fast on building things. You're kind of a faster on that if you have already something available that engineers just grab from the main repository. They put it in there. Yes, there's going to be some customization that's inevitable at some point, but at least you have the base and you kind of are very fast in that. And breaking down probably in different waves of working. Like, you're going to build this at this point, we're going to apply this to specific part of our product, and then if we see that this goes well, we extend it and we extend it. That's what we did basically in our case.
Yeah. Did you receive any pushback in that process?
I wasn't really present during the process.
Okay.
I just read the documentation, so I kind of did my,
Yeah.
let's say, how you say, do your homework. But
Yeah.
I had like a few talk. I think that there wasn't really pushback, also because time was a little bit on our side, in the sense that Yelp needed a refresh at some point. It was like UI was there since a long time, and it was actually great to have a visual refresh as well. I know that it's not the main focus of the design system, but bring also that visual freshness on a product is also like a good thing to see on the product, like evolution of the product.
Right. Bron, what about you? Any major challenges?
I go back to kind of the buy-in question, which, for us, interestingly, we've actually found with designers and asking designers, and there's no need to convince designers on why we should be implementing a design system. They're always super excited about consistency. They're super excited about kind of efficiencies in designing that they don't have to do and they can use. I mean, they're super excited about, we use Figma, variations in Figma, and being able to use that. So for us, it's never really been a conversation and having to convince designers. It's more on the engineering side. And I think, again, engineers are very similar to designers. They want efficiencies. They want to be able to kind of reuse code if they can. But a lot of the time, I think it kind of talks to both what Amanda and I was saying earlier. It's having to move the technology that often kind of creates that sort of resistance to doing it. You've got old school monoliths, or you've got technology that's slightly out of date, or designs that are out of date. And so moving on to a design system at that point is often quite a lot of hard work. And there is kind of, you can't just jump, we're on, I think, our design system is called Zui. We're on Zui. We're about to launch 19, which is really exciting. But we've got people on Zui 11, and you can't just jump from 11 to 19. It's not possible. And so we're kind of having to, and they have to go through that kind of slow update and trying to get, buy-in and convince them that it's worthwhile can be quite difficult. I think one of the best ways that we've actually found sort of works in convincing buy-in within an organizational level is, again, accessibility. Now, we have to meet those WCAG standards, both from a UI or a UX perspective, and also from the engineering perspective. And as an organization, Xero are really making an effort to move their entire practice to making sure that everything they deliver is meeting those accessibility standards. Now, if we can tell leadership, designers, engineers that what we are creating is sort of getting you 70-80% of the way there, people are much more excited to use it, much more enticed to use it, because they don't have to do it themselves and they don't have to think about it too much themselves. Fortunately, most people I speak to are really interested in the accessibility side, but sometimes it's a nice, easy way to kind of get it in and say, hey, you don't have to think about this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tobia, how did your design team work with engineering on the design system?
Yeah, I'm actually like excited about this. I'm always like excited working with like engineers, because I've always been fascinated about my design that I put on, like, say, on moving pixel and then become real. So that's something I think every designer is excited about. I mean, we have, of course, like a regular meeting where we actually meet for kind of a standardize this. We call it interfaces. So we kind of standardize the way that we create components and we design things on the design side, and we talk with engineers about how they should translate this on an engineering language, like to make engineers, set different variables, and like, how to set the components, and the customization of this one. We always run a little bit on the problem of how much we want to make this flexible or not. That's probably one problem that we face sometimes, because you don't want to make it too tight, because then you don't have enough flexibility on the components. So engineering might be a little bit reluctant, and then they'll be like, okay, it's faster for me to create my own components instead of using this, and I can't really use that components that much. But then on the other side, you want to make everything available on that components, because you want to cover the majority of use cases. But I think we have like a regular working designer engineer session. We kind of have this back and forth, and they build this and they make it available for all engineers, and there's always like kind of a quality check for design side, of course, to check if everything is fine. I think like engineers rely a lot on us in terms of like visual and and how visually this is, or how the components is, and how it's going to work in different occasions. And engineers are very focused like on their we rely a lot on them to make these components understandable for engineers, because of course we work for the same goal, but the languages sometimes are a little different. So
yeah, makes sense. Amanda, what about your design and eng team?
So it's really interesting. The design system is actually what united our teams together, because we all were able to speak the same language. And so our design and development team are actually on the same team now, where we have equal seats at the table, and even our engineers are leading the conversation, where the designers are looking to them as well for scalable solutions. And so it's been really critical. I would also say that we have had a different kind of challenge where the designers are pushing back and not the engineers, because we're being more efficient with our code and our debt that we have. But the designers at times have felt that they don't get to innovate or be creative. And that's a really common challenge for design systems. And so we've had to provide ways where we could still innovate and optimize and create better components, while also still allowing room for innovation within the work we do. But I would definitely say we've seen the latter, where the designers are challenging, only working in a design system and feeling like it's become a puzzle piece almost, and not having that opportunity to design things from scratch. And so that's kind of been a different hurdle that we've experienced.
Yeah, that's so interesting. How do you try to enable the designers to still be creative?
Yep. So we just, on our team culture, have created days like Brain Day, where we focus one day every month on just working on innovation projects that help them still get out their creative abilities, but being able to also align on the goal of what we're trying to accomplish. And so I think what really stems out of that is how we innovate our system. We come up with such unique ideas, whether it's through animations or more complex interactions, that really allows us to continue to push the system forward while still allowing everyone to have a voice or a part of building the system.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I like that. So let me see. We have some questions.
Sorry, I can also add
Oh, yeah.
like to
Did you have something
yeah,
to add?
yeah, the creativity part. I think like that's probably also a challenge that we have. Like, sometimes we have these components and designers will be lost because I'm like, yeah, these components that really doesn't really serve my purpose. And every time like a new designer join and we have this one-on-one and I can talk about the design system, I'm always like, our system is set up in a sense that you have like very small parts, a small atomic structure. Like we have this small part which is we call the ingredients. Our system is called cookbook design system. So we have this analogy about like cooking and creating pages, which will be like the entry and the dishes and the pages, and you start from the ingredients, right, as a cookbook. So it's I always encourage designer, like if you don't see a components that you probably doesn't serve your purpose, just try to build it with the ingredients. Eventually, like we have this small part that can be put together on the engineering side. So try to find like innovation with that one, with like the smallest part, and then of course we have the iteration about like check like with the design system if this is like in line with our guidelines or stuff like this. But this I think kind of free the designer of that stigma that they have to use the components, and if it's not there, I need to either detach it, which is a big problem, of course. But at least for my perspective as a the system designer, I would love that designer would never do that, but inevitably that happened. But it kind of a free the designer mind to be okay. I can do that as well. I'm not constrained with the design system because design system is there to help you, but it's not there to cage you. So I'm like, yeah, you can it support your decision. It doesn't have to force your decision. So.
Yeah, that is a good point. How do you deal with documentation for your design system, Bron?
We have documentation in a few different places. I mean, as Amanda was talking earlier about, documenting rationale and things like that. I know if you are beginning to start on a design system journey, please do that. We've got some really knowledgeable, wonderful designers and engineers, but there is things now we're sort of 4 years on and we're like, I was new. Why did we do this? What was this for? And there's not the rationale there to explain why. So yeah, if you're definitely beginning your journey, start your documentation. But at the moment, we have, like I say, we have a few different approaches. We have what we call our docs, which is where all our guidelines are, and they're sort of the recommended do's and don'ts and use cases and sort of implementation. We also have our kind of storybook and React libraries, and that sort of has specialized documentation in. As we are now going through our, creation of either new components or patterns or whatever it is, we actually create what we call, and this came in recently from a new principal on the team, our design history rationales. So we have documents that sort of document all the related tickets, all the related tasks, the decisions that were made in the decision registry, like why did we do that, useful resources, so basically everything that all our thinking process, every single part of our thinking process is now sort of being documented, and you can link your Figma files or your discovery docs. So yeah, we kind of have a few all over the place, but hopefully enough that people can follow the kind of breadcrumbs to the rationale.
Yeah, that's great. So I believe this is a question for Amanda. Do you rely on documentation primarily to share the design system across the org, or do you also provide HTML templates and/or CMS themes as well?
Yes, we use very similarly Storybook. We also use Zero Height. We have an XD repository where all of the designs are in. So we provide everything. The problem is we use Vue.js, and then you have people using Drupal and WordPress, and so these are different backend systems where we only at our unit support Vue.js. So we've been working with the broader university who are using other technologies to help align on making sure that the standards are consistent and that we are documenting them in these sources for us to be able to have a single source of truth broadly. And so, yes, we share everything from code to design to documentation in different formats.
Awesome. Were there any particular challenges with adoption by different units?
Yes, we're still going through that. I think kind of almost going on what Bronwen said, when you talk about you're on a different version and not having resources or time to move forward, I think that's where it becomes challenging. Is it's not a priority for the unit to have this beautiful web experience, but it's a priority for the university, for the student experience. And so even helping them understand the nuances of why these things are important, there's definitely a lot that you can do to help elevate the purpose of your design system, whether that's with the leadership, if that's with stakeholders, if that's with partners. There's a lot that you can do to tell the story and how it impacts their business objectives.
Okay, great. So we have a question from Catherine in the audience. How do you get buy-in from senior leadership for your system? Many people in our org seem to think this is a tiny feat and don't realize the amount of resources we need to build out for an enterprise multi-platform system.
I can
Does
probably
anyone want to
start
take
with this.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
since I'm probably the smaller of the teams, we spent a lot of time working on the side. And we didn't get buy-in at the beginning because you're not going to get buy-in to not do the work for the business, to do this other thing, even though it's extremely efficient. And so we started working on it on the side, and we were able then to prove out how we were able to scale the same landing page that we had designed 20 times for different brands. It was the exact same components, but a different logo, different colors. We had built that in our design system, and we were able to show how quickly. So before we might have launched it in 2 months, but then with the design system, we were able to launch it within 7 days. So by articulating the time it takes to launch, articulating the amount of resources it's taking now from design system to non-design system, you no longer need 5 designers, you need 1 designer. So I think by doing this, you're going to automatically see a lot of efficiencies within your current work stream. And it's about documenting it, being able to tie it back to a number, having data to show that it's improved your KPI because you've improved the overall look and feel. We did very similar to Yelp, where we took our design system when we needed a redesign and used that as well to capitalize on creating a scalable solution. So I think you have to be strategic with the right time, and also find ways to articulate it and document the wins that you get from it.
Yeah. How do you document these data-driven decisions?
I do a lot of Google Docs, especially if you're presenting to, or just decks in general. When you're presenting the leadership, you can't provide a list of story points from Jira that shows all the work that you've done, and you can't share, documents or spreadsheets. And so for us, what I like about presentations is you get to easily tell a succinct story in a very, small space. So using the less words as possible, showing your pretty much your wins, your efficiencies, having that in a single place, but then documenting that from the broader team. So if we do an A/B test on a component and we see that this one performs better than the variant, all of that is going into our Zero Height instance. And so with every component that we have, we document all the data that's associated to it. So when someone goes and looks at that documentation, they see why this one performed better or why this was the chosen component that we're moving forward with.
Yeah, makes sense. Tobia, what about Yelp? Do you have any particular like documentation styles or naming conventions?
Yeah, I will say like documentation. We try to put as many connection with that. I think one of the not the problem but the challenge that we try to kind of mitigate with this process is like discoverability of things. I remember before joining, I had like from the outside like hard time sometimes to find things. I think documentation really helped on that one, and it's also about like organizing your files and how the structure and where you put your things, and try to name it as best as you can, as well as you can. We have like the majority of documentation on the design side, so we have kind of a split system. We have like our internal side where engineers can go in and see which components with all the code and stuff like this, so they can reference from that. Also, designers can access on that, but they might be more familiar with Figma. So we have our documentation in Figma with like description of components, different variants. We also have one thing that we introduced last year is the kind of the state of the components. Like if this component is like fresh, is stale, or is expired. That's our three main topic, the three main categories of components. So designer know if they see the components, if it's fresh, it means like you can use it. This is built, platform is available. So that's actually help designers to understand. And I think the third point is actually offering some tools, which is another challenge that we tried to face. It's kind of offering tool, and I know this is a big topic as well, also in the talk. In the previous talk, it's about offering tool that serve a purpose for the designer, and I'm very like attached to that side because I love make the designer life easier and just like even give option to just like either find components, find documentation, find how do I use these components, so like be sort of the customer support for designer. That's how I feel being on the design system on my side, because that's my branch where I'm actually focused on. But yeah, mainly the documentation, and I love doing documentation and components. That's I can spend like hours on that, like, and just
Yeah.
get lost on creating components and documentation because I love blue lines. I love kind of that spirit of designer go in, they see it, they take it, they use it. They don't even have to think about it. They might have to read a couple of lines. So keep your documentation short and sweet if you can. Sometimes you
Yeah.
can, especially if it's copy documentation. But yeah, that's how we manage the documentation. But we are working also having like a public facing, so people can understand how we have this idea. There's if you go to Yelp.design, you can see how we think about the design system. The Kuku design system. It's just not fully fleshed out yet because it's one of our projects. So probably we're gonna launch it soon.
Yeah, makes sense. So how do you deal with that gap when maybe you're creating a new design system or you're creating a component that doesn't yet exist? What should the designer use in the meantime? Like, should they be creating a one-off component, or what does that process look like? Bron, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of different ways, and I mean, first of all, we ask the designer to they reach out to the Zui team or the design systems team to have a bit of a conversation around whether or not they genuinely believe it is a unique scenario. And 9 times out of 10, we can help point them in the the right direction. The other thing that we have as a benefit of being the design system team and people coming to us to talk about kind of the gaps that they have is that we get really clear knowledge of those gaps within the organization, or what the design system team or the design teams, the product teams are working on. So I can't count on my hand the amount of times people have come to us and said, oh, I need this component, or I need this, something like this, or I'm like, I just had a conversation the other day with this person and they're working on something similar. So we send them in, obviously, in that direction to kind of create collaboration between the team. But I think also, if it is a common enough request or a common enough pattern, we have two things. One of my colleagues is working on a almost a second library where components can go in and be tested and then potentially make their way to our library. The second is just a working group. So we actually spin up working groups all the time, and that's a collaboration between product, between engineering, research, design, and it's where we all sort of are talking together and establishing the new pattern together. So we really try and encourage breaking down those silos and kind of going away and creating a solution on your own. We're saying as an organization, what we want is for us to all be on the same page and understanding where our gaps are, and hopefully coming up with solutions that either meet the needs of those one or two teams and great, you go and use it, or actually is going to be used by the design system team and hopefully then by everybody else.
Yeah, awesome. Anyone else have a similar process?
Yeah, I think on our side we have a very small team, so just we're not like very like elaborate as a process in that sense. We know, as Brown said, if we have like a lot of requests, because we have this weekly meeting when people comes in and ask questions about the design, and they ask if their design is actually in line with our push system, if everything is working, if they have variation, if it's fine to have the variation. So if there's any variation, we kind of ask if this is some sort of like a rollout feature or rollout thing, and then if it's a rollout thing, then we kind of think about it more. But if it's an experiment, we kind of allow the one-off to just be an experiment and just see how things are going. So we keep it in the backlog, and we know that specific component, which might not be available, is a variation of current components. So it's kind of in the back of the system. We have we know that it's there, and then when we got result back, then we kind of iterate on the design, and eventually it kind of makes its way on the final, let's say, components library. And on the other hand, we also have a document which is some sort of like different pages with exploration of specific components. Like if I see that some components need to be unified, like pickers or other things which are very all over the place sometimes, we kind of design and take over that and take ownership of that, explore different solutions, try to make everything fit and kind of a more part of the design system, like very flexible, customizable, adjustable, stretchable, whatever you want to name it. But and then eventually we have the next step is connect with engineers, build that interface and see how it works, and then eventually make it to the design system and just make it available for engineer, and of course communicate with the designer that component is available.
Nice. Amanda, how do you deal with your design system? Does it have themes because you have such a broad use case?
Yep, we're going down that route right now because we do have different brands like Starbucks and Uber. And so we're not only looking at different themes, but we also have complex portals and mobile apps and websites, and they all are very different in the way you design for them. So we're having different versions, different themes to comply with all the different use cases we have, but most of the components we use are still consistent. So that's kind of the beautiful part about what we do is we get to blend the brands together. So in some cases, it's not just a color change. It is a fundamental change. Of Starbucks, they use a lot of handwritten style, and so we don't use that in our brand. So we do have a different theme for just the one-off use cases, but they still fundamentally use a lot of the core elements with different styling from our regional design system.
Nice, that makes sense. So Rachel in the audience asks, what are some components or elements in your system that aren't included in many design systems but should be? Does anyone have an answer for that?
So I think I touched on this one at the beginning, and I'm so passionate about this because there is so much subjectivity in design. We really prioritize on every single clickable element in our system. We have what we call a data layer. So using tools like Google Tag Manager and even working with the engineers, we've been able to scale out our components in a way where if we use the same component on multiple sites, it automates through Google Tag Manager these tags that fire that help us analyze click behavior by components. So we can understand right when we launch something, the exact engagement that's happening with this component versus maybe the same component on another site, but it's using a different value proposition or different content that would organically have different behavior, but it's the same component. So we're able to really understand the user behavior behind what we're building, and we wouldn't be able to do that without having a robust data layer attached to our components.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Anyone else?
I was just trying to think. I mean, it's hard to say without seeing other design systems. But
That's
we have, I
fair.
think, yeah. And I look around and I definitely look at the public ones, but they're always slightly different. I mean,
Mm.
we, as I talked about before, have content guidelines attached to almost all our components. So I think that's really a huge piece for us, is making sure that the actual content, or people are being supported with both the UI, the dev end, or the development code, and the content. I think the other one I touched on before is this sort of very new thing that we're trying, which is this second library, which is obviously slightly scary for some people, especially if you're just starting out with a design system. But
Yeah.
this second library is owned a lot more by the community, the product design community. And so the hope is that, they will eventually be able to bring in design or components into that design system. So I think that's quite a new thing, and I think that shows quite a mature design system when you're at that stage where you're looking for collaboration from the community.
Yeah, I think that's a great solution to slowly adding new components to your design system and testing them out.
I would also add like another things like since we started doing documentation and kind of I wouldn't say that before we didn't have before I joined the design system, but I kind of since I love the documentation, so I started doing that. My style was not the best, but then another teammate actually helped me to kind of make that visually a little bit better. And then I think probably creating as many links as you can inside documentation so people can go back and forth. That I think it's
Mhm.
another useful thing. And I always try to put like if there's any components connected to another components, which is in the same file, it's just a matter of jumping pages. Just put a link on that, on that name, so people click on it, just go and jump on the other component connector. So I'm trying, at least that's part of the user experience for designers who are using documentation. Since I mean, especially on Figma, you can do like it's like having a web page in that sense. So I'm just trying to put as many connections as I can so people can go here and there, follow the bits and pieces, and get the full picture at the end. It's kind of creating a website inside your documentation, basically.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Jessica asks, how do you promote the importance of keeping the design system maintained and updated while you also have other ongoing projects that tend to get prioritized? Oh, I feel that one. Anyone have any answers there?
I can go with this one to start with. I'm sure build off it, but I mean, obviously, I was very lucky, like I said, with regards to Xero's system. But I know, very similar to what Amanda said a little earlier, it never started that way. When I was told sort of the history, I know that it was sort of one designer and one engineer that sort of worked on it. But really, I think one of the things that they did very well very early is start to kind of record community usage or engagement. So something that we do now in a way to kind of apply metrics almost to your design system is keeping track of, where are those components being used? How often are they being used? Both from a design perspective. If you use Figma, I know you can use analytics to track the usage of the components. I'm sure you can in other tools. The same with engineering. You can kind of see who's on what version of the design system. And I think you can really use that as evidence that your design system is being used by your community or your organization, and therefore requires sort of a dedicated presence, or at least, continual update. Otherwise, these areas of your product or your organization are going to quickly fall behind again. The second one is very similar to Tobia, which is we do bi-weekly demos where we present to anyone that wants to drop in all of the updates that we are making to the design system, and whether that's technology-wise, accessibility-wise, design, and it's just a really great way of showcasing those constant updates that you're making, and how it's sort of a continual process and it sort of never ends. So although it's I'm from the question, it was kind of like you're being sidetracked and other things. Try and make time to try and do those education pieces is only going to help in kind of promoting what you're working on and what you're able to do. And sometimes the loudest person or someone who can kind of go out there and communicate well can get what they need and get that attention and hopefully dedicated resource on the design system.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like this question is, regarding a company that doesn't really have a design ops team. So I think, maybe also, do you guys put that into planning?
Yes, we do. And I think that being a smaller company or being a team of 1 or a team of 5, I think it's all about evangelizing and figuring out how to tell the story. And so what the biggest gap is that leadership doesn't understand. And so you have to get them to understand. And the only way to do that is to be an evangelist and find ways to understand the business. Because if you can be in, design and be able to tie back what you do to the business goals, you're going to get their attention. And I think that's the gap right now, is designers are transitioning to being more business thinking. And so that's only going to help you push forward of getting the buy-in and the resources and the support that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think probably communication is it's like a big thing here. Like the more you spread the words, probably a lot of people know the story about material design, how that was born. It was just a small team, the designers create on this, and they start asking engineer, can you use this, how this works, and then eventually became what it is right now. But it started, with a team of 5 people, I believe, 5 to 8 people. That's how they started, and right now they're the standard. Like after a few years. But yeah, I think probably sharing and evangelizing and showcase what you're doing. I know sometimes it's hard because you cannot sidetrack it. So as Bronwen would say, just make time for it. And at Yelp, we kind of did some sort of fair, and we show the different pieces of when we were at the office. We just kind of did like some sort of show, and we printed stuff and we showed videos, like we covered the word engineering, speaking about like cookbook, the word designer speaking about cookbook. We kind of brought in treats and stuff. We did the presentation. Like it was kind of showing the company, hey, this is happening. And it was also surprising that a lot of engineers didn't even know about that. And that kind of a spark our engineers say, oh, we are building this, and the word started spreading to the company. And then eventually we became a team, even though it was already some sort of a team before. But it kind of makes the company aware about, and also other people, like maybe stakeholders don't even know about this show that you did, but like eventually the word's going to go to the top and they're going to know about it.
Yeah. Do you all have recommendations for if your client or company doesn't have money to put into research or testing? How do you move forward?
That's a great question.
It's a really good question. One of the ways, I suppose at the end of the day, the design system often usually has two consumers, right? You have your end user, and then you also have your actual users of the system, which means that you can have a set of potential participants there to test with. One of the things that we find is quite hard to constantly justify going out and testing lots of components sometimes, especially with a team our size now. So we slightly could adapt some of the tests. So as I mentioned, we're sort of accounting software, but it doesn't mean that we have to test the accounting software. An example is I'm working on a table at the moment, and it might be that I can just put in sort of, I don't know, an example of like from a drop down, select your burger choices from a drop down. And so I'm testing the component in the same way, but maybe with a slightly different context. And then I can totally kind of guerrilla test with the consumers or the users inside the team or the consumers of the component. So I don't know if that's the best answer, but it's a way of getting the component out or getting a chance to test without actually having to put budget behind a testing plan and a research plan. Hopefully a quick win.
Amanda, were you also going to add to that?
Yeah, I think for us, what's fascinating, we didn't have a research team a year ago. And so we were in this predicament. Again, it goes back to finding time and prioritizing it, because it sounds like if it's not a priority, then being a user-centered company is not a priority, and that's a problem. And so you have to be the person at the organization to find time to do it. And for us, we had student employees, and so we would do research with them. We would take that research again, we would figure out a way how to tie it back to the business goals, KPIs, showing how we learned this and we optimized this and then this happened. So I think by having these case studies and being able to articulate how that impacts the broader community, the broader initiative, I think that's really important. And so if someone's not giving you that opportunity, still try to push forward. And it will only be a matter of time until they see the value, because it's inevitable that the value's there.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm curious, what is the biggest challenge that you've had with building your design system, and what did you learn from that? Maybe Bron?
I probably haven't seen the biggest challenge from Xero, as I say, because a little while. But our current biggest challenge is probably goes back to the one around users wanting creativity, or the designers wanting creativity. We hear so often that the design system doesn't meet our needs. We want to create this unique solution, or I want to create a page that's much more marketing focused and needs, bigger spacing, or even the opposite. We talk about accounting software. We need a page that is much more condensed, and the design system isn't flexible enough. And that for us is a huge challenge. We're trying to meet, the various needs of the organization and have enough flexibility in the design system that can happen, but also that we don't give up on that consistency element. And to be honest, like, the team have done a wonderful job, but we're still fine-tuning them and ironing out this challenge, and how do we do that, and getting different user feedback all the time kind of just adds to it, really. So yeah, that's one for us, is kind of balancing flexibility with consistency.
Yeah. Tobia?
Yeah, I think like at the beginning, as I was touching on that at the beginning of the talk on the panel, I think like the level of complexity in our case that we kind of needed to tackle, plus the fact that we were creating the design system while modernizing the product, that was kind of all together put together was kind of a big challenge and pile on top of each other. And I think that we're kind of modernizing three different platforms, and kind of make it very difficult to be able to kind of focusing on one single experience and kind of make that well, and then maybe expand it, because it was kind of a three platform at the same time. And also technically there was a lot of tech debt, and that was another thing that makes it hard to kind of move forward with the design, because as I said before, design is, I see it as a relatively easy in the sense that you can draw a pixel and it's there, it's created. I think technically wise engineers have that's why I admire engineering work, because I see it as a little bit more complicated technically. So it's just that were the main challenge. And then even though we wanted to move fast and have this ready and modernize all the pieces, we're kind of slow it down about those kind of a constraint. So that's why I said it's important at the beginning to kind of break it down, and that's what we actually did to solve this challenge. And we focus on the main, like on the core experience of our product, which was of course when you land on the app, when you kind of a search, and when you see the business page. Those were the three main things where people were spending most of the time. So we started a project called Pablo, and we modernized those three experiences. Like that was the very first focus. And out of that one, we tried to scale out to the other pages and eventually the other products, and by kicking off different projects along the way.
Yeah. Amanda?
I'll just say in short, just not letting perfection at the beginning slow you down. I think you want it to be the best system in the world, and it will be, but it's more important to make progress at the beginning than it is to have the perfect system. So I think being okay with that and knowing that it will evolve and become, better over time is just something that was a challenge, but you have to be okay with it and know that that's the better solution.
Yeah. Okay, well, I believe we're at time. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us and to you three for being on the panel. And I think I will hand it over to Preet.